Welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in poetry, spoken word, arts and culture. Featuring some heavy hitters in the world of art and social change, Saltwater Podcast aims to emulate the intimate conversation that happens within friends while introducing its audience to a cohort of vibrant talent. Featuring new episodes every 2 weeks and hosted by me, Lindsay Price, we are delighted to bring you some of the most exciting artists in the Northwest and beyond. This podcast was launched purely from a crowdfunder, so I mean it from the bottom of my heart when I say we have you, the audience, to thank. Be sure to let us know what you think. Thank you for being here for this episode, and enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Maria & Craig's, a distilled non-alcoholic CBD botanical spirit. Maria & Craig's combine premium CBD with natural hemp, distilled juniper, sage, chamomile and orange blossom, resulting in a fresh and bittersweet botanical blend best enjoyed mixed with a premium tonic or in a cocktail, very much like your favourite gin. We all lead busy, sometimes stressful lives, and for many of us, having a drink with friends at the end of the day is a welcome treat. With Maria & Craig's, you can have just that, but without alcohol and with the added benefits of CBD. Maria & Craig's won't intoxicate you, but it will help you unwind after a busy day, and it is delicious too. To get 15% off your purchase, head over to maria-and-craigs.com and use the code SALT15 at checkout. That's SALT15. Valid until the 3rd of May. Be sure to tag us in any pictures of drinks and cocktails you make and let us know what you think. Today I sat down with Amina Atiq and we had a really amazing conversation. I've known Amina for about 7 years now. We both kind of got started in poetry around the same time, so it's been really lovely to see someone carve a career out for themselves in those years. We got a little bit nostalgic, went down memory lane a little bit and just really paid homage to the woman she is today and the person she's become, and getting to hear about the kind of work that she's been producing in this time was really insightful, and the way she's kind of expanded into other realms within the arts and doing these amazing installations and projects which we'll hear about. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. So Amina is a Yemeni Scouse poet, performance artist, creative practitioner and award-winning community activist, BBC Words First Finalist 2019 and Young Associate and Anti-Racism Group Member for Curious Minds, Artist Fellow of DadaFest and Weston Jerwood Creative Programme. Currently working in collaboration with 20 Stories High, a new public arts project coming to Liverpool 8, working closely with Muslim young people, titled Poet's Gift. New work can be seen at the Imperial War Museum, One Story, Many Voices installation, and also a selection of poems at the Sutton Manor, Just Beyond Reach. Broken Biscuits and Collection of Works coming to DadaFest International Festival 2022. So yeah, hugely enjoyed this episode with Amina. I love any time I get to kind of get nostalgic and take a trip back down memory lane, so I really hope that you gain something from this episode. Please go support our sponsors if you're able to. I would hugely appreciate it. And also just thank you so much for the love on the first podcast. We dropped our episode number 1 with Jerry Clarkson 2 weeks ago, and the support and feedback since has been amazing. It's been received really, really well, and I'm just delighted that we were able to put that one out as our first one and that it's been appreciated in the way I hoped it would be. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm going to go rest my voice because I'm currently slightly unwell, and enjoy the rest of the interview. The vocal quality is about to get so much better because I'm recording this without a mic, and I'll see you all at the end. Hi, welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in spoken word, poetry, arts and culture. I'm so excited today to be sat with just an amazing poet and human, which is the wonderful Amina Atiq. Welcome, Amina, to the podcast.
Hi, Lindsay. No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes, but also dismantle the idea of where poetry comes from.
Yes, exactly. That's like all the things I want to get into today, so I'm so glad that we've got you here. I know a little bit about you. Obviously you've been, in Liverpool for a really long time doing your art. So but for people who don't know, tell us a little bit about the kind of thing you write about and like the kind of work that you do, because you do a lot.
I think maybe starting where poetry generated from and how it became part of that artistic narrative. So you know, I grew up in a local community in L8. And when you go to primary school, you move to your year group altogether. So all you know is your community, your family, your year group. So you kind of become quite safe in that environment, don't you? And I think where poetry started, because you see, when we talk about verse, we talk about poetry on page, but when we talk poetry, we're talking about the metaphor of life, we're talking about the metaphor of how we reflect, where our ideas started to come from, or relationships or conversations. And I think if I look at the poetry as a metaphor of life, I look at it as coming out of primary school into secondary school. That's when I think life changed a little bit, because you come from your safety net, your support network, the things that you love, things seem a bit like clouds and rainbows. And then you go into a school that's like 3 miles away from home, to an area that is not used to seeing maybe a lot Muslim girls or school Muslim girls in that area. And then you start to explore the themes of Islamophobia, racism. And obviously that's not the, you know, it's not always the ideal way to get into poetry. Some people think it's a heartbroken, you know, love story. Some people think maybe it's a death or a grief, but really it came from why was we treated differently because of the way we look. And I think I use poetry to navigate that narrative and understand why people became, and as a child, you know, I'm going to use childlike words, why people became mean. So I think my poetry began with a question. That was kind of like the first, I would say the first line.
When you first started writing, you know, hearing all of that as the backstory, were you writing it to make sense in your own head of the oppression that you were kind of experiencing?
Of course.
Or did you have the intention to share it at that point?
No, like it was never, see, people always ask me like, did you become an activist first or a poet? And I don't know. But I do know that they are, you know, the siblings of each other, because my poetry was always an active thing. It was always a doing thing. Even when I read my old poetry at 16, it's very like, it's an outspoken poem that needs to be performed on stage. So I do think I did start to develop this idea of my poetry needs to be heard, because I can't say it at the school bus stop. I can't say it in school, but I need to pick a place where it will be heard. So a lot of it was emotionally driven. The language, there was a lot of rhythm, a lot of meter. And I think, yeah, so I think eventually it did develop into poetry to be heard. This is the issue. I am now 27 years of age. This is 10 years after I left school. I'm now just starting to explore and navigate what it really means. And that's given the love and care that I'd never gave myself as a writer, because I felt responsible that I had to be the activist, a child at the same time, a teenager. And then you had to represent the Muslim community, the poetry community. And I just look on back and thinking, I don't owe anyone anything in this writing world.
Your responsibility as a writer is like, first and foremost, tell the truth, you know, and that's the truth that means that's your truth. It's no one else's. So like having that pressure from the external of people around you who want this narrative or that narrative, like that must have been a lot to navigate, you know, especially at like a younger age when you first started.
I mean, see, let's go back to poetry, metaphor of life. See, it's about storytelling and who holds that narrative. And when these, you know, going to school and you'd have a racist incident, you'd go to someone who looks like authority, maybe a school teacher. They didn't react the way you wanted to. So what you end up doing is taking that into your own hands by defending yourself, being vocal. I even once emailed the BBC thinking they will solve the issue.
Wow.
They actually brought someone to record an audio of schoolgirls at the school bus stop. And I just remember thinking, wow, I did that.
Yeah.
I brought them here just by emailing them at 15. But that's not my responsibility.
No. The fact that you were a child and trying to be responsible for your own safeguarding is just makes it that's ridiculous.
But that's the narrative there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally why then I went on to writing poetry, because I thought the only place I can really hold my narrative is on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And no one can ever take that away from you, ever.
Mm-mm. I think especially with you saying like performance as well, like when you write, there's maybe more chance of interpretation if someone were to read it. Not always, but the fact that you're on stage with your voice and your presence, and it's like you're controlling even the way it lands, the way people hear it.
Definitely.
I think is so strong. And when you first started writing, like what was the reaction of like your friends and family around you? Like did they know kind of what things you were writing about at the time?
You know, when you look back at your life, there's like different stages.
Mm-hmm.
I think people just thought I was really angry and frustrated, but I'm actually the opposite. I'm very emotionally, like, be quite shy and a bit, but I think it's always a persona that I've had to hold on to just out of fear, or maybe it's just a persona that made me feel strong. But I just feel like poetry it's given me that place where I can be myself. I think family and friends just didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing or saying what I was doing. But they were listening. You know, they never shut me up or silenced me or say anything mean or disencourage me. They'd listen, but they'd never fully understand. I don't think they still understand right now, but
there's almost something in that what you said about the anger as well. Like it's almost like poetry was a safe space to explore your anger. Like you saying you don't normally let that out, or like I don't think you don't come across as an angry person at all. You're quite I see you as quite like unflappable. I've never really seen you stressed, but like I'm sure that happens behind the surface. But I think it's almost nice, like with that persona aspect, I think poetry lends itself to that emotion quite well. You know, that's your say, and you're in a room usually, hopefully, with people who support you and believe in the words you say. So it almost feels like quite a safe space to be angry.
Of course, but even the opposite, I think. I mean, looking at anger as an emotion in poetry, it's a valid emotion, and looking back at all, because you see, poetry holds historical legacy in our lives, because we write in a place and of a moment that occurred in our lives, then becomes kind of like the story part of who we were at that time and place. And it's the gateway to the truth. Like, I can read a poem of the 18th century and really see the life of that persona or that artist or the environment in where they're writing. But I always ask myself when I was writing, who was I writing for? And I was always writing to the predator. So reflect on that question. How was my family reacting to it? The poetry was never for them. It was never about them. So I felt like they felt they were being ignored.
Right.
And that's me looking back now at 27, someone who maybe matured a little bit now, is to say, well, why would my own community listen to me if I'd never written about them or represented them? Because I was really just writing to the predator.
That's so interesting, that question of who is it for as well to think about. Tell us a little bit about Broken Biscuits. Like, I just thought it was such an interesting idea for a piece. So like, talk us through it.
No, this goes quite nicely into this, because Broken Biscuits became kind of like the start of a journey where I was exploring that narrative about my family, about my community, for them and about them. So it began from my granddad. So my granddad came in the 60s to Liverpool. I never met my granddad, but my granddad became like this like symbolic, iconic figure in the family who basically became the head of the family who migrated to Liverpool. And people tend to refer to my granddad as if he made a sacrifice. But it was never a sacrifice, he was an economic immigrant. It was after 15 years after Second World War II, it was an opportunity to grow himself as a businessman. And I think when we talk about migration, we think migration comes from maybe trauma or pain, or there's some type of persecution, but not in this story. And I think that just came from about like, as soon as you grow as a poet, people start to assume what your narrative is about. Because you say I'm a migrant, then they start to invite you to refugee events. Yeah. But then you're like, no, I'm not a refugee.
And I think
it's something different.
With being Yemeni, people think about the war in Yemen, and it must have been that, and it must have been
exactly. And that's literally, and I just thought, well, I'm a writer, like I should pick up the pen myself if I'm gonna allow others to assume what that is. So I think Broken Biscuits became that start of that journey of actually discovering what that means. And I think that started off as factual information. So looking back at like archives and research, digging up my family's papers. And obviously from a creative development, like that turned me into a producer naturally. Because I wasn't producing much work before then. I was just writing. 3 years later, Broken Biscuits has now turned into a collection of work, 6 collections of work, from a documentary, film, a stage play, a collection of poems, a project. So for 3 years, it's just grown like out of an idea of looking at my granddad to now 6 collections of work that is about my community and for them.
It's almost an irony there of like you created a piece about your family and now it's like a whole family of work in itself. There's all these little siblings and offshoots and things that have been created. How did you, because I've seen bits of the stage play, I've seen snippets when we've performed at the Everyman, and I think you had it on stage behind you. And how was it from writing poetry going to writing for the stage? Like what was that kind of transition like?
I think because you're just one. As soon as you're a performer of poetry, you're that one protagonist. You might jump from different characters in your poetry, but you are the main character. But then I think when you're writing for stage, it's about you're connecting dots. And obviously you need to use the space as well. I found it really challenging because I'm not a playwright. However, I think poetry can be turned into stage. I think it uses imagery, and poetry uses a lot of imagery. And for play, you need them images within. So I applied for the project grant, the Arts Council, 2 years ago, and I got it. So I went on to basically develop Broken Biscuits as a stage play. So I went to London. Not something that I was eager to do, but I think it was good practice to come up my own audience, because I think the Liverpool audience get you on. You're amazing, you're great, but I want critical feedback.
I think when you get to a certain level as well, where you start doing well, people will... my pet peeve is people just being like, oh, that was good. And you're like, well, what was good about it and what was bad? Like, I think it's so important to give real feedback, and sometimes the more successful a person gets, the more people around you are unwilling to critique, but that's what we all need as artists.
We need it. And honestly, Lindsay, that changed my practice. Performing a development play in front of directors of other fears, like it wasn't even like your average audience. We had a producer who literally allocated certain people into the room. I was nervous, absolutely nervous, but I think doing something that's still, I was reading off the page, like it was a development, it wasn't even a full play. It was a full play in writing, but it wasn't a full play in production. And I remember this is why critical feedback is so important, because these people don't know me. We selected people that don't actually know me. And one director I'm not going to name, said to me, he said, you know what, Amina, you're holding on to too much. And that just literally triggered like the whole past of holding on to so many narratives. What about you?
Wow.
And I was like, you know what, you're absolutely right, because I'm absolutely tired and I'm bored. If I'm bored of my own work, how's the audience going to feel? And he said to me, you know what, I think because this is a development, I think this should be Broken Biscuits and Collection of Works. And when I went home back to Liverpool from London, I spoke to the director and I said, I'm not going to go ahead with the second application for the Arts Council because I no longer want it to be a play. And that was a shock to people that I worked with because we were planning for it to go on tour. And we'd already contacted like theatre centres that really wanted to see an R&D of it. And I just said, it just doesn't feel right. And that critical feedback meant a lot. So Broken Biscuits and Collection of Works will be an exhibition, part of Dada International in November.
Wow.
So it's going to turn into like a gallery space. The race just transformed.
Yeah, that's so amazing though to, you know what, as well, like, well done you for being flexible enough to release your idea of what that piece should be, because I know I'm an artist and I'm such a control freak and perfectionist. So the idea of being set on like it's going to be a stage play and someone suggesting maybe it's not, maybe it's something different or bigger or better, it's quite a lot you have to like let go of in terms of your preconceived notions and then embrace this change. And just even on a personal, like, well done to you for having the courage to step into that.
It wasn't easy.
No, it's interesting. We had Jerry Clarkson on the podcast this week, and Jerry's amazing. And but in that we were talking a lot about giving yourself permission, and hearing that person saying to you like, "Where's your story?" I feel like almost was a bit of permission to like,
oh no, definitely,
you know, maybe even be a bit selfish, or just not even selfish, but like self-affirming. Like, no, I'm going to tell my story, and you know, you don't need to uphold everyone else's. Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, Lindsay, like that's just transformed how as a producer now, I think about that internal work that needs to be done, like creating steering groups, focus groups, creating like having critical friends, because I've seen, and also it's about how you take that feedback. Like I shocked myself a little bit because I am very like protective over my art, but I think I appreciate people who listen, because looking back at that, how creativity became part of my life is because no one was listening.
Yeah.
So now that I'm in that professional world and people are listening, giving critical feedback, I'm actually not that protective over my art. I'm more intrigued in who's listening and how I can make it better.
That's so interesting. I feel like as well, I wonder whether it's like maybe the fear of being misunderstood is kind of no longer, because it's like your poem, like they've landed. You know, whatever you've tried to communicate, people have kind of got the gist. So maybe that feeling less protective over it is because you're kind of like, oh, it's out in the world and it's being received how I want it to. So that's okay.
That's okay.
You know, I can breathe out now and like focus on other things. But well done for taking on board those suggestions, because it's not easy.
But obviously this is another challenge now. I've never done gallery or, you know, turning poetry into space.
Do you know like where it's going to be, or like the general size of it?
This is literally still planning. I mean, I've still got a lot of months. I mean, the great thing about Broken Biscuits, a lot of the work is fully produced. You have the interview between me and my grandmother Hayla, which is fully captioned, and so a lot of the work that I've created was fully developed. The documentary that I did is already captioned, like, which is about the Yemeni shopkeepers in Liverpool. The script is there, so I think it's like, how do I now turn a script into an installation,
into an experience, really, something immersive.
And it's Broken Biscuits. Like, I want people to come in, pick up biscuits and a cup of tea, and to go through the life of a Yemeni Scouse family within that experience of looking at pictures. And obviously there are threads in this work that still needs to be done. So I'm working with a producer from the Blue Co who's going to mentor me and coach me to basically tell me how they do it, because they've been doing it for years. And then I'm going to go away and think, okay, what material do I need? So it's exciting. It's a new experience, but it's a new skill I can add, you know?
Definitely. I've said that even with setting up a podcast, like, I don't know how they work. I'm not sure. I don't know how you interview someone, but I remember saying to like my dad on the phone, like, if you don't feel a bit scared by a project, then what's the point in doing anything if we're not growing? You know, we should be taking on things that are slightly outside of our comfort zone. So, and you're ultimately going to become a better artist for it, for pushing yourself in that way. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you said about the piece with your grandmother, and that was the bit that I've seen of Broken Biscuits, and I just wondered, like, what was it like having her on stage with you? Like, that must have been so intimate or almost surreal. You know, it's not like your grandma is on stage for a job often, so bringing her in there and having that sense of being in like a front room, it felt intimate to watch, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, like I was researching to my granddad, so, and obviously my grandmother's married to my granddad, so a lot of that information looked into my grandmother's life as well. I mean, I think this is a criticism in my way, the fact that I looked at my granddad first. I should have, and that's when I started criticising myself. My grandma's here.
Yeah.
Why are you researching into someone you never met with information that's not fully there? It's just fragments of information.
Yeah. When you have a real life person,
when
in
you've
front
got a
of
real
you.
life story, a real life person you can interview. So I said to my grandma, "Can I interview you?" And my grandma, my biggest supporter, so she was like, "Of course." Didn't really fully understand the concept, but you know, she was like, "Yeah." And then we were going to bring the filmmaker to come into the house, because I wanted it to have that homely feel, more like a little podcast kind of feel to it. But I was like, why don't we actually take a part of that living room, which is a Yemeni furniture, into the theatre space? And also that will be grandmother's first experience in a theatre space. But
her
also
first experience in a theatre space, and she's like the star of the show.
Literally.
Amazing.
But it's also like, you know, it's dysfunctional, because all you see is just a little piece of like a Yemeni furniture in the middle of it. And you know what? I went into that interview thinking I'm going to get all my answers from my grandmother. Got nothing.
Wow.
Because how I wanted information to be received was not the way my grandmother tells stories. And I found that quite interesting, because if I'm going to write a play that reflects my grandmother, I need to be writing in the way she sees the world.
So, like, in what way you say, like, you felt like you didn't get the questions answered? Like,
you know, I tell her to tell me how it was life in the 80s as a young woman. She'll give me snippets of their memories, but it would be more like, especially because it's told in Arabic, so in my mind, I have to translate in English in my head and then understand it. But it was just fragments, constantly fragments of memories. And I felt quite a bit frustrated, because I was like, I want to be an honest writer. I don't want to fictionalize this. I want it. But when do you become then a writer? Because you have to give yourself that space to fictionalize things, to make things up, to fill in the gaps. But I think that's what made the interview so interesting, because it was just snippets. There was never any full answers. There was a lot of humour, and even when we talk about my granddad, and obviously I didn't know how close my grandmother was to my granddad until that interview. But I asked my grandmother a very selfish question, but I said to her, why didn't you remarry or fall in love again? And that's when she kind of like broke, because she was carrying on this like persona, being dead funny. And then she just broke and said, well, you know, there was no one like your granddad, and that's it. But I wanted more.
yeah.
And that's all she was giving.
This is like the unpredictable nature of working with people, right? You know, you can have all your ideas in your head of like, it's going to go this way and this is going to be my angle, and they're like, no, screw it, I'm going to talk about this, like, you know. And you know, from watching, your grandma seemed very like a character, like you could see the humor and like the confidence, but I imagine that being frustrating on your part if you're trying to like steer it one way. But again, like, yeah, humans are so unpredictable.
It is. And also, it's, if I'm going to write and my grandma becomes a protagonist in this play, or one of the main characters, I need to reflect it. And I think that interview really helped me think about character, and it made me think about, and also I think it gave myself permission that I'm not going to find all the answers, and I need to start becoming a writer and not just someone who's just archiving information.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you're a poet for a reason, so now's the time.
It's been, honestly, Lindsay, I think, because some of the work was produced under COVID as well, it's been a life-changing experience, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without Dada's support and obviously public money. So I think this is why it's really important that the development of artists is in place. It's not just small micro commissions, but there's organisations who are, who allocate funding that's long-term development.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well for artists, like, you unpicking an aspect of your identity on stage and in galleries and through projects in a very public way is so important to everyone. Like, I think everyone can learn from someone exploring their family, their background, their history, even if their backgrounds are totally different. And I think that's why it's important that we do fund art and we do fund people, because art isn't just entertainment, it's culture and it's history and it's politics and, like, it's got that across in a very human way.
No, definitely. I mean, it's education, isn't it? And also it's about telling history accurately, because when we look at the 60s of Liverpool, we don't really cross over into the Yemeni British people, the sailors, the businessmen who came before their wives. They were a big part of the economy straight after World War II. So, setting up business after World War II wasn't an easy thing for people to do. Hence why it's called Broken Biscuits, because my granddad opened up a local newsagent and he sold broken biscuits. And obviously then that became, and obviously Broken Biscuit, it's a historical moment in British history anyway, because Broken Biscuits was a big massive thing. You can go in and ask for like a custard cream and a little chocolate biscuit, like you can mix it. I mean, why didn't they just bring it back?
Honestly.
I mean, maybe that's a business idea that I need to implement.
Your whole project just ends with one petition and it's just to bring that back.
But I was very strategic with the title, because there is a few plays and projects called Broken Biscuits across the UK, because it's a historical, symbolic name to a period of time. But I strategically chose that because when I was doing a lot of research and I was asking people on social media, it was actually like white British men who were responding to this, because they saw themselves in that term of broken biscuits, or they remember a historical moment of them buying biscuits when they were children. So I thought, well, my play is very Yemeni central. How can I then have a universal voice in this? And I think the title,
it brought in people who felt like that was familiar concept.
And it was, because the Yemeni people integrated with the Brazil, and that's a way of saying, well, there's no difference here. Like, we might share different cultures, but we definitely shared biscuits.
I love that as a sentence. I love that. Tell us a little bit about, like, this was a
just
great...
thinking that's going in the gallery floor.
Really? We've planned it. You're gonna have so many more ideas by the end of this. No, but I love that, and I think, like, I just think what a great way, and that narrative of, like, the Yemeni community being integrated and accepted and celebrated as part of British community, like, isn't told a lot. So having that reminder is actually really, really nice and really important.
Honestly, like, and the more I looked into the history, the more I realised, like, and this is another thing, like, I was thinking, oh my God, am I becoming a historian now? Like, that's not my role. Like, I just want to write poetry. But, some of the stuff, like, Yemeni people came in the 18th century and they were sailors, and they didn't even step foot into Britain. They were working on the ships. But until Thatcher cut off, when things started becoming industrial, I can't say the word.
Industrialised.
Yeah. A lot of the sailors then came off the ships. And that was the first time they actually saw, like, a city. And obviously you could imagine the conditions were quite you know, not great. So, but you know, you've got sailors from the 18th century, you've got families who are still here. I mean, you've got the famous milkman who is Yemeni from Liverpool, but no one is writing these stories. And I just felt responsible. But I feel like now it's not my responsibility. I'll do my best as I can wherever that narrative takes me. But maybe set an example so that other Yemeni writers can tell their own stories.
I think that giving other people permission to step into their own truth and power is really important. And all you can do, like you said, you know, it can't fall on you to be like the voice of so many people. You know, you're Amina. You can tell it from your perspective and your experience, but your experience might be completely different to another person. So
exactly,
but giving people permission and inspiring, hopefully, you know, is great.
Well, this is why Broken Biscuits is a gallery floor. Hopefully, I'm hoping that when other Yemeni young people come into the space, they'll see my family story, but to make them think about what does their story look like.
Sure. And how does their story fit into
this?
Tell us a little bit about, like, you know, this is obviously a huge project and passion of yours, but like in terms of the rest of your career, like you've done a lot, and I remember you being around, because we got started around a similar time.
Yeah,
and
we did. Yeah.
We were babies. We were so much younger then, and I just remember seeing you at the start, you know, like me, going to like every possible night ever and just trying to get on stage as much as possible. And now I've seen you grow, and I feel like a grandma saying this, but I've seen you grow into, like, you know,
it was the Jacaranda, wasn't it?
It did it. It helped.
Wasn't it? The Jacaranda,
Yeah, but even before that, I remember seeing you at events before I set up mine, and we'd just always be on stage. And you've grown really into like such a confident woman with this breadth of work under your belt. Like the amount of stuff that you have done in the past like 6, 7, even more years is really amazing. So, but I was just wondering, like, you know, what do you think is like your favorite kind of memories, or like the proudest thing that you've worked on, you know, aside from Broken Biscuits? Like what else kind of like springs to mind?
By the way, thank you so much for acknowledging that journey.
It's okay.
It's just took me back a bit, and I just thought, wow, it's been a bit, you know, been some amazing things, and then obviously there's been a bit of challenges as well.
I actually remember as well, like my dad, I don't even know if you remember this, like he would come to Rhymes and Records, and I think he came up to you once and was like, "You've got so much more confident." And I was like, "Alan, like she's like a really well-known poet, like stop like giving your opinion to people." But he was like trying to give you a compliment, but I think I was just like, "Alan, no."
No, it's honestly, you know? It's took me back to Jacaranda. It's took me back to, and obviously, like, you know, I don't drink, and obviously the poetry scene across the UK, it's heavily drink is part of that culture, and which is fine. I just remember people constantly offering me orange juice.
Oh wow.
Or, which is obviously a nice gesture, but I was like, excuse me, like I might want a red wine.
Yeah. You're there with like your double gin, like you don't know.
But it was just like, it's just loads of memories, but also just like, we were young, like looking back at, I know age is not always a thing, but like in terms of like life experiences,
we were babies.
Like taking over that stage, thinking taking over the world, it was not on then.
Honestly.
But I think it fed into, you know, that seed that just started to grow. I mean, I think looking back, I kind of asked myself what was consistent. And I think that consistency was commitment. Like, there's no guidebook how to become a freelance poet. There's no A to Z how to get there. You can look at other careers and there's like you know, there's a guide or steps or clear path. So I think I give it to a lot of freelancers who are in the arts that really do kind of create that guide themselves and manifest that. But I think one of the kind of like happiest moments or proud moments that I would say really, which I kind of missed in the pandemic, was literally that arts community. And I just think that really, like, I can't, even if you grow into an international artist, I think looking at that local community really did, you know, it was the first moment someone actually acknowledged you as a writer, as a poet. And that's something that I'm now manifesting to go back to, is actually going back into local work, and that's what I'm doing now. Because I just think it's priceless.
Yeah, I agree. I think having community, especially at the beginning when you're setting out, is so important. And like, just the idea of having belonging to a community in general is important, you know, regardless of what that is. But for some reason, like, you know, I attribute like a lot of my success to the poetry community, to people around me who really big me up and, you know, didn't boo me off stage the first time I ever did a poem and made me feel like, oh wow, actually maybe I can do this. Like, I think it's totally underestimated the power of people and community. And often when you read about famous artists, even like, you know, like Matisse or Van Gogh and like people who are really well known, they usually were part of a group of people who were doing similar things, and they just so happened to be the person who like kind of made it through. But like that goes for all art genres. Like, you know, poetry is responsive, and often there's a lot of people creating work, and it's that momentum and that group effort that builds success, I think.
No, of course. I mean, looking back at the Jacaranda, just you know, standing up with it. Well, how old was I? About 19, 20, you know, and performing one of your really vulnerable pieces, maybe. Yeah, I think it was so important, and I think even the people that you brought on in the podcast that I saw are people that we've shared the space with, and just to see them still continuing their art just shows you how important it was to start off with the community. But that doesn't mean that we can't expand our wings and go international. And I mean, that's the issue with sometimes Liverpool artists, is that I feel like we owe it to our local, and that's great, but there needs to be that permission to give yourself that. If you need to become the successful artist that you need to, and you need to travel to a different city, then there's nothing wrong with that.
I think there's like definitely something to be said for going out of the city and breaking away, especially if you've been doing kind of community little like DIY stuff for a while. I think there's real importance in that. And then like you said, you know, you're coming back to that because you've had some time away or some time around other cities and you've grown, and now you're like, okay, let me bring that back to like where I started. So it's a process, and just because you step away doesn't mean you're abandoning. Well. Yeah, you know, you're just learning, and we've all got different paths. And
also it's what works for your art form. I mean, we don't have a poetry literacy agent in Liverpool, so I can't really publish here as a poet unless I self-publish. So really, I need to go out the city.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I can't inspire or I can't shout about it and be like, can we get a poetry literacy agent here, or can we? So it's what works for your art form. Yeah. If it's not here, it's not here.
Of course. And I think even in terms of watching other work, it's so important to travel as well, like, because after you've been in Liverpool for a while, you start to feel like you've seen every poem. You've seen every poet, you've seen every poem, you know their stuff probably better than your own stuff at this point. And then you go to another city and you're like, wow, the amount of people in this country who can write is just like staggering. And I think that refreshes you anytime you see an interactive work from further afield. It ultimately like deepens the practice.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was really fortunate enough to go on like international exchanges. So I've gone to Holland, Germany, Budapest. I also did some work in Egypt, but like just seeing how people also explore their own art forms and how they do it, it kind of really does challenge your own. I mean, when I went to Holland, every artist can play an instrument, like so many different, and I'm just like, you know, and that's fine, but it's just really challenged. And also, I remember in Holland, the director was like, we want you to do a poem over some jazz music. And I was like, no, like,
wow,
never done that before. And I was just a bit like, no, because I wanted poetry to sit alone. I was really adamant. And also it was the best thing I ever did. Like, I felt amazing. And then they had the dancer to the poetry. It seemed a bit mad, but it's about saying, you know what, poetry can be transformative and it can transform into other stuff.
You're one of the few poets who can say you had a backing dancer. You demand it every time you go on stage.
Honestly, it was a bit like, what could you say? Like, you try to like hold the space, but this is the thing. It's about sharing the space. But I think one of my like latest things that I did was I was in Egypt at a time when they were on a red list country, so I was stuck in Egypt.
Wow.
But obviously, being an artist, you create art wherever you are, even if you're stuck in a desert. And I had a bit of funding that I had to do or spend for Dada Scratch, but obviously I wasn't in the UK, so I then said, well, can't I do something here? And obviously they said, of course. So I created a project called The Third House, which basically I use all the skills I've learned over the years and thought, you know what? I've been on exchanges. I've been in a lot of like labs and consultation spaces. Like, why don't I hold space for different artists here? So I basically organised a Yemeni exchange day. I got 8 Yemeni artists together where they all paid as well. So it's that producer skills that I put in place that I haven't used in the UK. And I basically also hosted the day by facilitating on the theme of diaspora. And a lot of Yemeni people in Egypt have come from war. So it was really nice to just take a step from that and actually hold a space for them. And by the end of it, we then produced like scratch performances mixed with poetry and puppetry and music. And that was filmed by a filmmaker. And then I went back to the UK, wrote a blog about it with all the content, the pictures. And one of the most amazing things that I just experienced is, because obviously I haven't seen Yemen for like 11 years. And, you know, you miss your first home, the home that you were born in. And obviously Egypt has become the second place of home to a lot of Yemeni people with this current war. And I remember going into the shop floor and there was just Yemeni clothes everywhere.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, like I just felt like, you know, like a Yemeni in like Winter Wonderland, but like a Yemeni version. Just like going through these clothes and just head beads and I remember trying them on and then my friend was like, you look like, he went in Arabic, he went, you look like a child who yearns for her Yemen. And obviously, you know, Yemen is a big part of the narrative in my poetry. And I then bought some of these clothes and I brought them back into the UK and actually took a photo shoot with me on them because I wanted to experience what that feels like to actually wear part of your home on you. Because we don't have access to these clothes here. So it was just, you know, to be able to give yourself permission to say, I've got a bit of money here. Let me hold space, pay others to do their art. But then also, I gave myself permission to actually do something that I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
It did feel a bit embarrassing standing in front of a camera and posing, but it wasn't about me or whoever. It doesn't matter even if I was wearing it. It's the idea of what it felt like.
And the symbolism of what that means, like bringing that back with you. And like you said, like being stood in England, you know, embodying that aspect, because I think it's so important. And like, actually that whole trip just sounds so healing.
Oh, it does. I mean, even just the way I'm writing poetry now has shifted. You know, I start off from a perspective of like, I think, okay, for example, one of the lines of my old poems used to say, I carried a suitcase on my back. I kind of like hijacked this narrative as if I was the immigrant who travelled from a home of persecution, when really, when I look at my own migration story, we travelled on a flight by our own will, as anyone travels. And I remember saying to myself, why am I writing something that's untrue? Because I'm hijacking the narrative that's already told about us.
Yeah.
And I think that experience in Egypt and trying them clothes on and doing that artistic process with it, I'm now writing from a place of what it is. Like coming to my Yemeni Scouse household, we watch the Liverpool game, have a roast dinner, eat with our fingers, fighting over who's better, Mo Salah or Mane, because they're both Muslim. Like, it's hectic, it's chaotic, but that is the truth.
it's truth. And I think that goes back to the meaning of like true authenticity, you know, like that really is your story, your version of events, rather than you feeling the pressure from external to, you know, provide a narrative of any type. We are going to close out in a minute.
Yeah,
I feel like I could speak to you honestly forever. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but you are welcome back on whenever you'd like. Hit us with a poem before we go.
Yeah, of course. I can't believe how time went just really quick. But
Honestly.
thank you so much for just acknowledging that journey with me, because I think we'd never give ourselves time to really understand what that means. And I think I'll do this poem which fits perfectly about that narrative of. So this is called Belong. We swerved between checkpoints. An armed young man watched from a distance. An elderly man squatting in a dark corner stared, and a group of veiled women on the balcony giggled, so I stuck my national flag out of the car window. And the skin brushed against the plain window, and I was there in a strange land, and I was there greeted. But soon we became friends, best friends. But too soon we betrayed our roots, my olive back-combed hair, I hated the smell, my jet black hair falling down my back, too thick to carry, too different. I chopped it all off. But I was there in glass windows and brick walls, begging on the streets for a penny for a guy. Watching the firework display light up your new city, and then eat a halal Christmas dinner. Sprinkle grandma's spices, a taste we've been trying to recreate even if we tried. And then soon my Scouse accent lingered on my tongue, and I wanted to feel wanted like that. But I made sure that I did, but I slept with my mother's voice in my ear, never forget where you came from. But in my broken Arabic I said, Mama, hada huwa biladi. Hada huwa biladi. This is the home I need. And then a little ginger boy down the road, hey, where do you come from? And I picking at my skin scarred with mosquito bites to remind me what is marked shall never be forgotten. So on my perfect broken English Scouse, I come from here. He looks down at his hands, but you look different. So I stuck my tongue out. You want to come out and play? He nodded and smiled. We played piggy in the middle with his friends. But by sunset, it was my least favourite game. Because I couldn't sleep that night. Because there were sirens on my TV. And he looked exactly just like my father.
Wow. Ultimate authenticity.
Oh, thank you.
And that concludes today's episode. So thank you so much for tuning in. You can find more of Amina over on Twitter, Amina Atiq Poetry, or on her website, aminaatiq.org. That's spelled AMINA ATIQ, and we'll put all the links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for listening. Please go follow us on Instagram, Saltwater Poetry. And be sure to like and subscribe and all of the things as well. Thank you so much. It's been a really enjoyable one. I've loved doing this interview, and I can't wait to see you all at the next.